Too lowborn to be his Duchess, the Duke proclaimed. But she became his secret passion, enemies to lovers. In 1815, England, the icy Duke Edmund Harrington publicly shames lowborn Lady Clara Whitmore as unfit for his title. Yet a forbidden spark ignites, turning enemies into secret allies in a web of honor, scandal, and unspoken longing. Will desire shatter their worlds? Subscribe now and comment where you're listening from for more Regency romance. The grand ballroom of Rose Hill Manor shimmered under the glow of 100 flickering chandeliers, their crystal prisms casting rainbows across gilded walls and polished marble floors. The air hung heavy with the scent of fresh jasmine from overflowing vases, mingling with the subtle perfumes of London's elite who had travelled to Ashbourne County for the season's most anticipated gathering. Lady Clara Whitmore stood near the edge of the dance floor, her empire waist gown of soft blue muslin whispering against her skin as she adjusted the delicate fabric with trembling fingers. The high waistline, fashionable in this Regency year of 1815, felt like a gentle embrace, yet it could not steady the flutter of anxiety in her chest. Her chestnut curls, pinned loosely with pearl combs, framed a face flushed with anticipation and a creeping sense of dread she could not name. Clara's family, though noble, teetered on the fringes of high society. Her father, Sir Thomas Whitmore, a baronet with modest estates in the rolling hills of Ashbourne, had arranged this match with the Duke of Harrington to secure their future and elevate their standing. For weeks, Clara had been told of this honor, this blessing. Yet standing here now, surrounded by the rustle of silk and the murmur of gossip, she felt more like a lamb led to market than a bride awaiting her groom. Whispers of the Duke's arrival rippled through the crowd like wind over wheat fields, heads turning toward the entrance with eager curiosity. Clara's mother, Lady Eleanor, squeezed her gloved hand with desperate hope. "Smile, dear. Tonight, you become a duchess." But Clara's spirit, sharp and unyielding despite her youth, rebelled against the cage of expectation closing around her. She was no fragile ornament meant only to adorn a man's arm. She read forbidden novels by candlelight and dreamed of adventures beyond ballrooms and marriage contracts. Then he entered. Duke Edmund Harrington commanded the doorway like a storm cloud rolling over the moors. Tall, impossibly broad-shouldered, his naval blue coat tailored to perfection with high lapels, framing a crisp white cravat tied with military precision. His dark hair was neatly combed back from a face carved from stone, jaw set in a line of unyielding resolve, and his steel-grey eyes scanned the room with the cold precision of a predator surveying prey. The orchestra faltered mid-note as ladies curtsied low and lords bowed with deference, but Edmund's gaze cut through them all like a blade through silk, landing squarely on Clara. For a single heartbeat, something flickered in those eyes. Recognition? Intrigue? Perhaps even reluctant admiration, before ice reclaimed them, freezing whatever vulnerability had threatened to surface. He strode to the center of the floor with purposeful steps that echoed on marble, boots gleaming, where a cluster of influential earls and viscounts awaited his attention. Clara's heart pounded against her ribs like a trapped bird as her mother nudged her forward with an insistent hand. This was the moment she had been prepared for, the introduction that would seal her fate. But Edmund's voice, deep and resonant as cathedral bells, sliced through the air before she could take 3 steps. "Gentlemen, ladies," he proclaimed, his tone laced with aristocratic disdain that carried to every corner of the vast room. "Let it be known clearly and without question. Lady Clara Whitmore is too lowborn to grace the Harrington name as Duchess. Such a union would tarnish centuries of honor and breeding that my family has cultivated with care." Collective gasps echoed like shattering glass across the ballroom. Clara froze mid-step, her fan trembling violently in her grip, the delicate ivory sticks blurring through the veil of unshed tears that suddenly stung her eyes. Heat flooded her cheeks, not from the room's warmth or the press of bodies, but from the scorching sting of public rejection delivered with surgical cruelty. Eyes turned to her from every direction, pitying from some, triumphant from rivals who had coveted the Duke's attention, horrified from others who recognized the social devastation of such a pronouncement. Her mother's hand clutched her arm with bruising force, nails digging through silk. "Edmund, this is madness. Lady Eleanor hissed with barely contained fury. But the Duke's gaze remained fixed ahead, unmoved as granite, accepting a glass of brandy from a silver tray offered by a trembling footman. In that crushing silence, where even the musicians dared not resume their playing, Clara lifted her chin with a defiance that surprised even herself. Their eyes met across the expanse of polished floor, his steel grey clashing with her emerald fire like swords meeting in combat. A jolt passed between them, electric and unspoken, like the first crack of thunder before a summer storm breaks open the sky. She saw it then, in that fraction of a moment, not just disdain in his stare, but a shadow of internal conflict, a magnetic pull he fought desperately to bury beneath duty and pride. His jaw tightened imperceptibly, a muscle jumping, before he turned away sharply, dismissing her existence with brutal finality. The orchestra struck up a lively waltz to dispel the suffocating awkwardness, couples swirling into motion with forced gaiety. Clara retreated to a shadowed alcove behind a column of marble, her breath coming in shallow gasps, the muslin of her gown suddenly too confining, too tight. "How dare he?" she whispered fiercely to herself, fists clenching at her sides until her nails bit into palms. Yet beneath the righteous rage simmered something more dangerous: curiosity. Why proclaim it so boldly, so publicly? Was it truly her modest station, or something deeper, something he glimpsed in her defiant eyes that terrified him? Across the room, Edmund gripped his crystal glass tighter, the brandy burning less fiercely than the unwelcome warmth spreading through his chest like wildfire. He had seen dozens of eligible brides paraded before him over the years, meek, polished dolls trained to smile and obey. But Clara, her wit had sparkled in stolen conversations at prior assemblies, her laughter a melody that haunted his nights when duty demanded cold calculation. No, he could not allow it. His position demanded a match of unassailable prestige, a bride whose bloodline matched his own ancient lineage. Not this dangerous spark that threatened to consume his carefully constructed world. Yet as he watched her compose herself across the ballroom, shoulders straightening with quiet strength that commanded respect, a forbidden question stirred in the depths of his guarded heart. What if? The night wore on. In a haze of dances Clara declined with polite frost and sympathetic murmurs she ignored with regal bearing. When the evening finally ended and carriages rolled away under moonlight, she found a letter slipped into her silk reticule by an anonymous hand, sealed with unfamiliar wax. A warning? An invitation? She pocketed it unopened, her mind replaying that charged glance that had passed between them like lightning. Outside Rose Hill's windows, thunder rumbled over Ashbourne's hills, mirroring the storm brewing within two hearts bound by scandal and secret longing. The morning after the ball broke over Ashbourne with a sky the colour of pewter, low clouds pressing down on the rolling hills, as if they too carried the weight of last night's scandal. Dew clung to the manicured lawns of Rose Hill Manor, turning each blade of grass into a tiny blade of glass. Lady Clara Whitmore walked the gravel paths of the East Garden with slow, measured steps, her slippered feet making a soft crunch that felt deafening in the hush of dawn. The pale lavender of her simple morning gown was a far cry from the shimmering blue muslin she had worn beneath the chandeliers, but her heart still beat with the same restless, bruised rhythm. She had not slept. For hours she had lain awake in the guest chamber, staring at the ceiling's painted cherubs, while the Duke's words replayed in her mind with cruel clarity. "Too lowborn." The phrase echoed like a verdict. Yet what stung even more than the insult was the memory of his eyes. How for the briefest instant they had betrayed something other than disdain when they met hers across the ballroom. That tiny fracture in his composure haunted her far more than his public proclamation. Clara paused beside a stone bench and rested a hand on its cold surface, drawing in a slow breath to steady the tremor in her chest. The roses bordering the path had begun to open to the weak morning light, their petals beaded with moisture that looked suspiciously like tears. "Foolish," she murmured to herself, though she could not decide whether she meant the Duke's behavior or her own insistence on caring what he thought. She had always prided herself on her independence of mind, yet one man's opinion, spoken before an audience, had reached deeper than any gossip ever had. Footsteps crunched on the gravel behind her. Clara stiffened, shoulders squaring, before she turned with practiced composure. Lord Reginald Thorne approached with the easy swagger of a man too comfortable in drawing rooms and shadows alike. The early hour had not deterred him. His dark coat was perfectly brushed, his cravat tied with ostentatious care, and his smile curved as if he relished the taste of scandal still hanging over the manor. "Lady Clara," he drawled, offering a shallow, mocking bow, "I had hoped to find you this morning. I confess the events of last night have not left my thoughts. What our illustrious Duke did was dramatic, even for him." Her spine straightened another inch. "Then I suggest, my lord, that you find something more useful to occupy your thoughts." The dryness in her tone made his smile widen, as if he enjoyed seeing the spark still alive in her despite everything. "On the contrary," he replied, stepping closer than etiquette strictly allowed, though not close enough to warrant a scandalous scene. "A lady cast aside in such a fashion deserves allies, friends, someone with enough influence to ensure that a single man's arrogance does not define her future." Clara's fingers tightened around the edge of her shawl. The way he said influence made her skin prickle with unease. "And you consider yourself such a friend?" she asked, keeping her voice polite, though a warning note threaded through it. Lord Thorne's eyes gleamed. "I have always admired your resolve, Lady Clara. You are not like the simpering debutantes who faint at the first hint of adversity. A woman like you deserves a match forged by choice, not by arrangement. Harrington's loss could be a significant gain for another." His gaze dipped briefly, not to her figure but to the tightness of her hand on the shawl, as if weighing how far she might be pushed. Before Clara could deliver the sharp retort forming on her tongue, the distant thunder of hooves rolled across the garden like an approaching storm. Both of them turned toward the drive. A black stallion appeared through the mist, powerful muscles bunching beneath a sleek coat as it slowed to a controlled trot. Duke Edmund Harrington sat astride the animal, with the easy command of a man accustomed to mastering both beasts and men. His dark coat was open at the throat, the morning ride leaving a faint flush along his cheekbones, his hair slightly less disciplined than the night before. Even from across the lawn, Clara felt the shift in the air. His presence changed the texture of the morning, made it sharper, more vivid. The stallion halted near the garden gate, and Edmund dismounted in one fluid movement, boots landing with a solid thud on the gravel. He handed the reins to a waiting groom without taking his eyes from the path where Clara and Lord Thorne stood. Clara willed her heartbeat to steady as he approached. She told herself that she did not care whether he came to speak to her or merely to survey the damage his words had done. Yet with each step he took, the world around her seemed to narrow. The roses, the bench, the gravel all fading, until only the measured sound of his boots remained. "Thorne," Edmund said, his voice low but carrying easily, edged with a cool authority that made the Viscount's practiced charm falter for a moment. "I was under the impression that vultures preferred carrion to living prey. Perhaps I was misinformed." The insult was veiled just enough to pass as a biting jest, but the warning underneath it was unmistakable. Lord Thorne's smile stiffened. "Your Grace," he replied, bowing with exaggerated politeness. "I merely offer sympathy where it is deserved. Lady Clara has endured what many would call a public injustice." Edmund's jaw tightened, a flicker passing through his eyes that only Clara, standing caught between them, seemed to catch. "Whatever Lady Clara has endured is of no concern to you," he said evenly. Then, turning his attention fully onto her, he added, "I would speak with you, my lady, alone." Every instinct in Clara screamed to refuse. Pride urged her to turn her back and leave him standing in the dew with his requests unanswered. Yet another part of her, quieter but more persistent, wanted answers. Why had he chosen such cruelty? Why had his eyes betrayed a conflict that his words denied? She inclined her head. "Very well, Your Grace." To Thorne she said, "I thank you for your concern, my lord, but I assure you I am quite capable of enduring what the world chooses to hurl at me." They both watched her with different intentions in their eyes. Thorne's gaze promised manipulation disguised as aid. Edmund's held something far more complicated, a mix of frustration, vigilance, and a strain of protectiveness she refused to acknowledge as real. Clara followed the Duke down a narrower path, lined with clipped hedges and early blooming hydrangeas. The morning's chill had not yet burned off, and a faint mist lingered, softening the edges of the world. They walked in silence for several steps, the gravel crunching softly underfoot. When Edmund finally spoke, his voice was quieter than she expected, the harshness of the ballroom tempered, though not entirely gone. "You should avoid Lord Thorn," he said without preamble. Clara stopped, turning to face him fully. The distance between them was respectable, yet the intensity of his gaze made it feel far smaller. "After what you said last night," she replied, "I find it curious that you concern yourself with whom I do or do not speak to, Your Grace." His eyes darkened, not with anger directed at her, but with something more inward. "Thorn thrives on the misfortunes of others," he said. "He stirs whispers, collects secrets, and turns them into snares." He was circling before the ball ended. "And you?" she asked, unable to keep the edge from her voice. "What is it that you collect, Duke Harrington? Honor? Applause? Or the satisfaction of crushing those you deem unworthy beneath your heel?" A muscle jumped in his jaw. The mist dampened a lock of hair at his temple, softening the severity of his features, but his eyes remained piercing, fixed on her with a focus that made her feel seen and stripped bare all at once. "You misjudge me," he said quietly. "Do I?" Clara took a step closer before she could think better of it, her shawl slipping slightly from one shoulder. She left it, refusing to fuss. "You stood in the center of that ballroom and declared me too lowborn to touch your precious name. You tore away my dignity in front of every eye in the room. If that is not the act of a man who enjoys the sound of his own judgment, then enlighten me, Your Grace." "What should I call it?" He did not flinch at her words, but his gaze flickered just once to the faint tremor in her fingers where they clutched the edge of the shawl. His voice, when he answered, was roughened, as if it had been pulled through gravel. "Necessary." The single word struck her like a blow. "Necessary," she repeated, tasting it as if it were something bitter. "To whom? To you? To the ghosts of your ancestors glaring at you from their portraits? What grave calamity would have befallen Harrington Hall if you had allowed your name to be tied to mine?" He took a step toward her then, instinctive, as if drawn by the fire in her eyes despite his attempts to remain distant. Clara felt the air shift with his nearness, the scent of hoarse and cold air and the faintest trace of his cologne mingling into something that made her pulse leap. He stopped before their sleeves brushed, but only just. The proximity wrapped around her like a cloak, heavy with unspoken tension. "You do not understand the world in which I move," he said, softer now. "Every alliance is weighed, measured, recorded. My title is not merely a name. It is an institution. It binds estates, families, obligations that stretch back generations. One misstep, one union the Lords deem unsuitable, and everything my forebears built can be eroded by slow, merciless whispers." "Then you should not have allowed such talks to begin," she answered, her throat tight. "You should not have permitted our families to hope. You should not have looked at me as if what?" The question came out before he could stop it. His voice dipped lower, something raw threading through it. Clara's breath caught. The mist around them seemed to draw closer, muffling the distant sounds of grooms and clinking harnesses, leaving only the thud of her own heartbeat in her ears. She forced herself to hold his gaze, refusing to step back. "As if I were more than an inconvenience. As if I were someone you saw, not just a name on a ledger or a pawn in some grand strategy." His lips parted, but no words emerged for a moment. In that brief silence, she saw it. The conflict warring behind his eyes like two waves crashing against each other. Duty and desire, fear and fascination. "I see you more clearly than is wise," he said at last, the admission barely louder than a whisper, but it struck her with the force of a shout. That is precisely the problem. The truth of it vibrated between them, dense and invisible. Her fingers loosened on the shawl as his words sank into the cracks that humiliation had left behind. Anger remained, but it tangled now with something dangerously like understanding. "You could have refused quietly," Clara said, though her tone had softened against her will. "A discreet word to my father, a vague excuse. Instead, you chose to make a spectacle of it." His gaze hardened again, though not at her. It turned inward, towards something dark only he could see. "I chose," he said, "to make your name untouchable to men like Thorn, publicly. There are those who would interpret silence as opportunity. By declaring you unfit for my title, I ensured that any man who pursues you does so in defiance of Harrington, not with his blessing. It draws a different sort of creature." Clara stared at him, stunned. It took several heartbeats for the meaning of his explanation to settle. "You humiliated me," she said slowly, "to protect me from worse." His mouth curved, not into a smile, but into something like self-derision. "Do not mistake it for altruism, Lady Clara. I did not act solely for your sake." His gaze flicked back toward the path where Thorn had stood earlier, then returned to her, sharpened by resolve. "There are forces in our world that prefer their prey unguarded. You are not unguarded." A strange warmth unfurled in her chest, at war with the memory of pain. "And what am I to do with that?" she asked. "Thank the man who shattered my reputation because he believes he did it with a noble purpose." "No," he answered simply. "You are to be wary of men who approach you now. Some will seek to rescue what they believe has been damaged. Others will seek to profit from it." His eyes softened only slightly. "You are more than capable of defending yourself with words. I merely ask that you do not ride into every battle alone." A breeze picked up, teasing a stray curl free from her hair. It brushed across her cheek, and before she could stop herself, she lifted a hand to tuck it back. Her fingers faltered when she realized his gaze had followed the movement, lingering on the small, ordinary gesture, as if it were something far more intimate. For a fleeting second, she wondered what it would be like if he reached out, if his gloved hand brushed that same cheek in silent apology. He did not move. The restraint in him was almost palpable, a tension that hummed in the air between them like a plucked string. "I do not need your protection," she said at last, though the words lacked the sharpness they might have carried an hour earlier. "But I will heed your warning regarding Lord Thorn." Edmund inclined his head, the motion precise. "Good. Then my interference has not been entirely in vain." "Interference is a gentle word for what you did," she replied, a hint of wry humor sneaking into her voice despite everything. To her surprise, the corner of his mouth twitched, an almost smile, quickly suppressed. Their gazes locked again, longer this time. The world around them seemed to hold its breath. No one watched, no orchestra played, no chandeliers demanded performance. It was just a man and a woman standing in a misty garden, wrapped in the aftermath of a storm neither had fully chosen, and yet both now had to weather. "Lady Clara," he said slowly, as if choosing each word with care, "I cannot offer you what the world expects from me. But there are battles coming in which our paths will cross again. When they do, remember this morning, not last night." Her heart stumbled. "And what precisely am I to remember?" she asked. "That I am not your enemy," he answered. "Not entirely." With that, he stepped back, the spell between them thinning but not breaking. He bowed with formal distance, yet something in the tilt of his head felt different than the gestures he reserved for the rest of society. As he turned and walked away, his figure gradually swallowed by the mist, Clara stood alone among the hydrangeas and roses, her emotions in riotous disarray. He was wrong, she thought. He was absolutely her enemy. And yet, as the memory of his conflicted eyes burned behind her own, she could not deny the perilous truth. No enemy had ever made her heart beat this way. Somewhere beyond the garden walls, in the smoky confines of a gentleman's club or the dim corridors of a lesser estate, Lord Thorn would be learning that his first attempt to snare the Whitmores had failed to unfold as expected. Plans would shift, rumors would coil tighter. Clara drew her shawl more firmly around her shoulders and lifted her chin. The game had begun, and whatever Edmund Harrington believed himself to be, enemy, reluctant guardian, or something far more dangerous, she would not walk through it as a pawn. She would be her own force. What she did not yet realize was how closely and how quietly the Duke would watch over every step she took. Rain returned to Ashbourne as if the heavens themselves had decided the county deserved a second washing after the disaster at Rosehill. By afternoon, the sky had darkened into a heavy quilt of clouds, and a thin drizzle streaked the windows of Whitmore House in trembling lines. Inside her father's study, Clara sat at a wide oak desk that smelled faintly of ink and old tobacco, her posture straight, her mind anything but calm. Before her lay 2 letters. One bore the familiar seal of Harrington, dark wax stamped with a crest she now associated with both humiliation and a strange, unwanted safety. The other carried no recognizable mark at all, only a smear of red wax and edges that looked as if they had been handled by too many fingers. Clara's gaze lingered on the anonymous letter. It had arrived that morning with the regular post, tucked among invitations and dull estate notices. The handwriting was neat but unfamiliar, its lines almost too carefully formed. Shadows pooled at the pit of her stomach every time she looked at it, as though her instincts knew something her mind had not yet confirmed. "You will make yourself ill if you continue to stare at them that way," came her father's voice from the doorway. Sir Thomas Whitmore leaned against the frame, his shoulders slightly stooped, grey threaded liberally through his hair. Worry had etched new lines around his eyes in recent months, the result of debts Clara only half understood. Yet today, there was a different strain in his expression, embarrassment, and beneath it, a flicker of anger directed not at his daughter, but at the world that had dared to wound her. "I cannot decide," Clara replied, nodding toward the letters, "which serpent I should charm first." Her attempt at lightness earned a strained smile. "Start with the one that reveals its fangs openly," he advised, crossing to the desk and tapping the anonymous seal. "Cowards hide their names, men with spines sign them." Clara hesitated a heartbeat longer, then broke the plain wax and unfolded the thick paper. As her eyes moved over the words, the muscles in her jaw tightened until they ached. "My dear Sir Thomas," she read aloud, her voice steady by sheer force of will, "it has come to my attention that certain obligations of yours, long overlooked, may soon fall into less forgiving hands. There are those who would take great pleasure in seeing Whitmore lands divided and sold, your name dragged through mud you cannot wash away." She paused, swallowing the rush of heat in her throat. "However, I am a reasonable man. There are alternative arrangements, should your daughter be amenable to a more advantageous alliance." Sir Thomas cursed under his breath, a low, bitter sound Clara had rarely heard from him. "He does not name himself," he said, more statement than question. "No." She flipped the page, scanning quickly. "There are hints, references to card tables in town, to a certain night at Brooks's last winter." She looked up, meeting her father's eyes. "Whoever wrote this knows you, or knows of you, intimately enough to weaponize your worst mistakes." Her father's shoulders sagged, the weight of past choices settling visibly upon him. "I was a fool," he murmured. "Your mother warned me that the tables would not be kind forever. I believed I had time to mend what I lost before it mattered. Now it matters to you." Clara's anger at the unseen writer sharpened, slicing cleanly through the last traces of her own shame. "This is not about cards," she said. "It is about leverage. About using your debts to corner us. To corner me." Her gaze slid to the second letter, the one bearing the Harrington seal. The wax gleamed even in the dim light, steady and unapologetic. She picked it up, pressing her thumb briefly against the raised crest before she broke it. The paper inside carried Edmund's handwriting, strong strokes, economical, without flourishes. Every line of ink felt like an extension of his presence, contained, controlled, and yet charged with something that resisted being smoothed entirely. "Lady Clara," she read silently first, then aloud at her father's quiet nod. "I have reason to believe that attempts may be made to coerce your family under the guise of settling obligations. Certain men delight in drawing blood from those who show even the smallest wound. I would advise extreme caution regarding any new propositions that arrive without clear identity attached. If you are in receipt of such correspondence already, I implore you not to answer until we have spoken further. Harrington." No apology, no sentiment. Yet Clara felt warmth coil in her chest despite herself. The letter was not cold. It was careful. Every word chosen to offer warning, without overstepping the boundaries he had drawn so ruthlessly in public. Sir Thomas sank into the chair opposite her, rubbing a hand over his face. "He knows," he said quietly, "about the debts, about the men who hold them." or about the men who wish to," Clara replied. She laid the anonymous letter beside Edmund's, the contrast between them stark. One veiled, oily, the other sharp, clear. "He told me yesterday to avoid Lord Thorn," she added, more to herself than to her father. "He said there would be battles ahead. I thought he meant gossip and whispers. I did not expect this." Her father watched her carefully. "Do you trust him?" he asked, no judgment in the question, only concern for how she might answer. Clara's fingers traced the edge of Edmund's letter, following the line where paper met wood. Images flashed in her mind. The cold pronouncement in the ballroom, his conflicted eyes in the misty garden, the way he had stepped closer without quite touching her, as if proximity alone were dangerous. "I do not know what I feel about him," she admitted, "but I believe he means what he says, for better or worse." Sir Thomas nodded slowly. "Then perhaps we allow his warning to guide us, if not our hearts." He stood, straightening his coat. "I will consult our solicitor, and you, my dear, will stay far from men who send ghosts instead of signatures." After he left, Clara remained at the desk, staring at the two letters until the ink blurred. Finally, she folded the anonymous one and slid it into a small wooden box, locking it with a key she tucked beneath her locket. The Harrington letter, however, she did not hide. Instead, she placed it in the top drawer, the one she instinctively opened when she reached for paper to write her own thoughts. As her fingers closed the drawer, a knock sounded at the study door. The butler entered, composed as ever. "A messenger has arrived from Harrington Hall, my lady," he said. "His Grace requests your presence at Rosehill Manor this afternoon, should it be convenient." Clara's pulse leaped, despite her attempts at calm. "Did he say why?" "No, my lady. Only that the matter touches upon your family's ongoing welfare." Her heart tightened at the phrasing. That was Edmund, unable to simply write safety or danger, wrapping concern in the language of duty. She rose from the desk, smoothing her skirts with a practiced hand. "Tell the messenger it will be convenient," she said. "Very convenient indeed." The rain had deepened into a steady curtain by the time Clara's carriage approached Rosehill Manor. Water streaked the glass, blurring the estate into a series of pale shapes, columns, trees, distant hedges. Inside, the carriage smelled of damp wool and lavender sachets, the rhythmic clatter of wheels over gravel, a restless drum beneath her feet. As she stepped down, assisted by a footman, a gust of cold wind snatched at her cloak. She wrapped it tighter, feeling the chill bite through the fabric. The entrance hall of Rosehill greeted her with warmth and candlelight, portraits of long-dead owners gazing down with the solemnity of people who had seen too many seasons of politics and pride. Edmund waited near the base of the sweeping staircase. He wore a dark coat, his cravat again immaculate, but there was a tension in the set of his shoulders that betrayed a mind not entirely at ease. When she entered, his eyes found her almost immediately, as if he had been listening for the exact moment her steps would cross the threshold. "Lady Clara," he said, inclining his head, "thank you for coming." "Your letter suggested my refusal would be unwise," she replied, unfastening her cloak. A footman moved to take it, and for a fraction of a second Edmund's gaze tracked the movement, lingering on the sudden reveal of the soft plum gown beneath, then snapping back to her face as if he'd caught himself wandering. "Not unwise," he corrected. "Merely inconvenient. For both of us." He gestured toward a side corridor. "If you will join me in the small drawing room, we may speak privately. I assure you, the door will remain unlocked, and a footman stationed just outside." The specificity of his reassurance startled her, until she realized what it was, a preemptive defense against even the hint of impropriety. He understood what his reputation and hers could and could not withstand. "Very well," she said, allowing him to lead the way. The small drawing room lived up to its name. It was intimate without being confining, lined with bookshelves and warmed by a fire that cast a gentle glow across a pair of armchairs positioned at an angle near the hearth. Rain whispered against the windows like a conversation too soft to catch. Edmund did not sit until she had chosen a chair. She selected the one that allowed her to see both him and the door. He took the other, leaving a careful distance between them, close enough that she could read the tiniest shifts in his expression, far enough that no one peering in would see anything but propriety. On a small table between them lay a folded sheet of paper. The seal on it matched the anonymous letter she had locked away. "You have received one of these, I think," he said, following her gaze. "Yes," she answered, "from a man too cowardly to sign his own name." "A man who assumes desperation makes signatures optional," Edmund replied, a hint of contempt sharpening his tone. "He is wrong, but only if you refuse to play by his rules." "Who is he?" Clara asked. "So you know, don't you?" Edmund's fingers tapped once against the arm of his chair, a restrained gesture that spoke of restless energy. "Lord Reginald Thorne is not clever enough to orchestrate this alone," he said. "He is a mouthpiece. A spider needs a web, and Thorne is merely the silk it uses." Clara's thoughts jumped back to the garden, to Thorne's carefully sympathetic smile. "Then whose web is it?" "A man called Mallory," Edmund said. "Not a peer. A financier who lends money to gentlemen who believe themselves too important for accountability. He acquired some of your father's debts 2 months ago. Now he is testing how far he can stretch the strings tied to them. Why should you care?" The question left her lips before she could temper it. "You have already declared to the world that I am unfit for your title. My family's ruin would only confirm your wisdom in their eyes." Something flickered in his gaze, hurt, quickly buried, replaced by a steadier determination. "I care," he said, "because I do not enjoy watching good families be torn apart by men who have never earned what they own. And because—" He paused, choosing the next words with visible effort. "Because I find I cannot tolerate the thought of you being used as a bargaining chip." Her chest tightened, an ache spreading beneath her ribs. "You did that yourself," she said quietly, "in the ballroom." "Yes," he admitted, the word heavy, "and I regret the manner in which I did it, though not the outcome it produced." The admission stole the air from the room for a moment. Clara studied him, searching his face for any sign of artifice. Instead, she found only a man holding himself in a careful balance between contrition and stubbornness. "What outcome?" she asked. "Mallory will assume you are of no value to Harrington now," Edmund said, "which means he cannot use you to hurt me." That was his original intent. When he realizes that path is closed, he will shift his aim entirely to your father. The anonymous letters are the first move. "And the second?" Clara's voice dropped. "He will attempt to maneuver you into a corner," Edmund replied. "An advantageous proposal from a man of slightly higher standing than your father, backed by threats of financial ruin if you refuse. He will ensure the offer appears like rescue rather than coercion. A lesser man might even appear charming." "Lord Thorne," she said. "Precisely." Edmund's jaw set. "Mallory prefers to remain unseen. Thorne plays the gallant fool while strings tighten around your father's neck." Clara exhaled slowly, forcing her racing thoughts into order. "Then what would you have me do, Your Grace? I doubt Mallory will cease his games because you frown in his direction." "No," Edmund agreed, "but he may reconsider if he realizes Whitmore is not standing alone on the board." His choice of metaphor caught her attention. "And how would you suggest we convey that?" His eyes met hers fully then, the steel softened not by weakness, but by resolve, by a decision made and accepted. By allowing certain people to see that Harrington remains connected to Whitmore interests, despite the absence of an official engagement. The implication landed between them like a stone dropped into still water, sending ripples through everything they had said before. "You want the world to think we are still allied," she said slowly, "even after what you declared at the ball." "No," he corrected. "I want certain men to think that harming you harms me, even if they believe I am too proud to admit it aloud." The words brushed against places in her heart she had worked hard to guard. "And what of the truth?" she asked. "What do you believe, Your Grace?" His gaze held hers, unflinching. For a heartbeat, 2, 3. The air between them felt charged, like the moment before lightning strikes, when the whole sky seems to draw breath. "I believe," he said quietly, "that whatever the world sees, whatever it thinks it understands, there are some connections that cannot be undone with a single sentence in a ballroom." The admission, simple and understated, struck her harder than any grand declaration could have. It was not poetry. It was not flattery. It was a crack in the armor he wore so fiercely. Clara's fingers curled against the fabric of her skirt, grounding herself. "Very well," she said at last. "If allowing certain people to misread our association keeps my father from being dragged under, then I will play my part." A muscle in his throat moved as he swallowed, the only visible sign of tension. "You understand it will invite speculation," he said, "that some will whisper your name with mine in ways neither of us can control." "They already do," she replied, "and they will with or without my consent. At least this way their whispers might buy us time." For a moment, something like admiration flickered across his face. "You are remarkably calm, considering." "You have not seen me when I am not," she answered, a faint smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. He studied that almost smile, as if memorizing it. Then he stood, offering his hand, not as a lover might, but as an ally inviting another onto the field. "Then we proceed as partners, Lady Clara. Not in name, not in law, but in this fight." She hesitated only a fraction of a second before placing her gloved hand in his. His fingers closed around hers, warm and firm, the contact sending an undeniable jolt through her. It was a simple touch, entirely proper, and yet it carried more weight than any dance they might have shared under chandeliers. For the briefest heartbeat, neither of them moved. Rain beat harder against the windows, as if the world outside wanted to break through and witness the fragile alliance being forged in this small, fire-lit room. Clara met his gaze, feeling the ground shift beneath them both. "Very well, Your Grace," she said softly. "Let us see how your board game is played." What she did not add, what neither of them dared to say aloud, was the truth both already sensed, that in choosing to stand side by side against shadows, they were stepping into a different kind of storm entirely. The storm did not wait for nightfall. By late afternoon, the sky over Ashbourne had turned the color of wet slate, clouds stacked in ominous layers that swallowed the horizon. Wind rose in sharp, fitful gusts, rattling the windows of Whitmore House and making the old trees groan like tired giants. In Clara's bedchamber, the fire burned bright, casting a restless glow over the room as she paced from hearth to window and back again, skirts whispering across the carpet in agitated loops. On the small table near her bed lay a fresh letter, not from Edmund, not from Mallory, from Lord Reginald Thorne. He had not bothered with anonymity this time. His seal pressed the wax with smug confidence, his handwriting curling across the page in practiced elegance. Clara had read it twice, and wished, both times, that she had not. "My dear Lady Clara, it grieves me to see a woman of your spirit and worth treated so poorly by a man who values his pride above all else. While others whisper, I act. Your father's debts may yet be resolved, quietly, honorably, if you would consider a union with someone who sees your true value." The words had burned. He had wrapped his threat in velvet, but the iron underneath was unmistakable. Her father's peace in exchange for her future, tied to a man who saw her pain as leverage. Clara stopped her pacing, fingers tightening around the window latch as a particularly strong gust of wind slammed rain against the glass. The urge to fling the window open, to let the storm in and strip the room of its suffocating stillness, pulsed through her. Instead, she forced herself to breathe, slow, deliberate breaths, the way she had taught herself to do when panic threatened to swallow reason. A knock sounded at her door. "Come in," she said, smoothing her skirts, though her heart would not obey her command to steady. Her maid Elsie slipped inside, cheeks flushed from climbing stairs in haste. "My lady, forgive the intrusion. A rider has arrived from Harrington Hall." His Grace left at once for town to attend an urgent meeting, something about creditors and a certain Mr. Mallory. She swallowed, clearly unsettled. "But he sent a message for you through his steward. He said if Lord Thorne should call, you are not to see him alone, under any circumstance." A mix of exasperation and reluctant gratitude twisted through Clara's chest. "So he assumes Thorne will not wait politely for clear skies," she said. "I think His Grace believes Lord Thorne doesn't wait for anything," Elsie replied softly. Before Clara could answer, another sound cut through the storm, the distant creak of carriage wheels, muffled but unmistakable, followed by the slam of heavy doors below, and the murmur of male voices in the entrance hall. Elsie's eyes widened. He cannot be here already. Clara's pulse leaped in a way that had nothing to do with excitement. Go, she said quickly. Find out who has arrived. Come back straight away. And Elsie, yes, my lady. If it is Lord Thorn, tell my father I will be down shortly, not alone. Her tone left no room for argument. The maid nodded and vanished, leaving Clara alone with the thunder's growing growl. Clara crossed to the dressing table, catching her reflection in the mirror, the tightness around her eyes, the determined set of her mouth. A part of her wanted to bolt the door and feign illness, to put off the confrontation with Thorn, until Edmund returned from town with whatever weapons he believed he could find in ledgers and legal papers. But Edmund was not here, and Thorn was. There would be no avoiding the first move. She took up Edmund's letter from the drawer, his warning, his reluctant vow to stand beside her, and held it for a moment, letting the steadiness of his script calm the tremor in her thoughts. Then she put it away, squared her shoulders, and left the room. The descent down the main staircase felt longer than usual. Candle flames swayed in their sconces as wind clawed at the house, and every creak of wood sounded louder against the storm's distant roar. As Clara reached the landing halfway down, she paused, hand resting on the polished banister, listening. Voices drifted up from the hall below. Purely friendly concern, Sir Thomas, Thorn was saying. Surely you must see that your daughter's position could be restored, improved even, if she aligned herself with someone who values her. She is not a coin to be traded for the settling of accounts, her father answered, voice strained but firm. Clara stepped down one more stair and leaned subtly against the carved rail, angling herself so she could see without yet being seen. Lord Thorn stood near the door, rain still glistening on his cloak, dark hair damp at the temples. He looked every inch the concerned gentleman, brows drawn in faux sympathy, hands open at his sides as if he offered nothing but kindness. Sir Thomas faced him, shoulders squared but eyes tired, as though the storm outside had found its way inside his bones. And yet, Thorn continued in that same smooth tone, accounts must be settled, must they not? It would be a tragedy if Whitmore House were to suffer because of one man's stubbornness. I offer a solution that preserves everything, your name, your lands, your daughter's standing. Clara's fingers dug into the banister. And what of my daughter's choice? Sir Thomas asked quietly. Thorn's smile did not quite reach his eyes. I assume an intelligent woman such as Lady Clara would choose the path that spares those she loves the most pain. There it was, the blade behind the velvet. Clara drew in a slow breath, the wood beneath her palm grounding her. Then she stepped down the remaining stairs, letting the click of her shoes on polished stone announce her entrance. You assume a great deal, Lord Thorn, she said. Both men turned. Her father's shoulders sagged with visible relief at the sight of her. Thorn's expression brightened, though a calculating glint flickered behind the charm. Lady Clara, he said, bowing, I was just saying how deeply I regret the unfair circumstances you've been forced to endure. She descended the last step with measured grace, stopping where she could stand between Thorn and her father with a glance, though not so close as to suggest undue intimacy. The house seemed to hold its breath. Even the storm's howl dulled for a heartbeat. Unfair circumstances, she repeated. You speak as though you had no hand in them, my lord. His brows lifted in wounded innocence. I? Lady Clara, I have done nothing but offer sympathy and assistance. Assistance, she echoed. You mean the letter sent under a veil of anonymity, the one that threatened my father's peace while pretending to be a lifeline? Thorn's composure faltered for a fraction of a second. So quickly another might have missed it. Clara did not. The set of his jaw tightened, his eyes chilled. Then the smile returned, practiced and smooth. Anonymous letters circulate in any season touched by scandal, he said. I cannot be held responsible for the actions of cowards. No, she agreed. You are responsible only for the actions you sign. Her father glanced between them, understanding dawning on his face. Clara, it is all right, Papa, she said gently. We will not pretend courtesy where none exists. Thorn's gaze sharpened, some of the polite mask slipping. A woman in your position, he said, voice dropping, might want to consider how few allies she can afford to discard. "A woman in my position," Clara replied, matching his tone, "would be foolish to mistake a leash for an ally." Their eyes locked, emerald and dark brown, resolve clashing with entitlement. For a heartbeat, the hall felt too small, the air too thin. "Lord Thorn," Sir Thomas interjected, stepping forward with as much dignity as his frayed nerves would allow, "I believe this conversation has reached its natural end." "That is unfortunate," Thorn replied, though his gaze remained on Clara. "I had hoped we might come to a mutually beneficial understanding." He paused, letting the implication hang. "But perhaps you would prefer to see your father's estates auctioned piece by piece, his name called out by creditors in court." Clara felt her stomach twist, but she kept her voice level. "Mallory may hold paper," she said, "but he does not hold our souls. And you, Lord Thorn, do not hold anything at all." A muscle pulsed in his cheek. "We shall see," he murmured. "Storms have a way of revealing which houses were built on rock and which on sand." He turned then, cloak swirling behind him, and strode toward the door. The butler moved to open it. Wind and rain gusted in, flinging cold against Clara's face. Thorn paused on the threshold and glanced back one last time. "When the rain has stripped away your illusions," he said softly, "remember that I offered you shelter." Clara met his gaze without flinching. "I prefer the storm." Their eyes held for a breath. Then he stepped out into the downpour, the door closing behind him with a final heavy thud. Silence rushed in to fill the space he left. Sir Thomas exhaled shakily, bringing a hand to his forehead. "Clara, my dear, I am so sorry. If I had not—" She crossed to him at once, taking his hand between both of hers. "No," she said firmly. "We will not spend our strength apologizing for what cannot be undone. We will spend it deciding how to move forward." He searched her face, seeing not the girl the world had decided to pity, but the woman forged by its careless cruelty. "You sound like your mother," he murmured, a hint of pride softening his features. "She would have slammed the door herself," Clara replied. "I only did it with words." He huffed a weak laugh, and likely cut deeper than any slammed door could. Thunder rumbled overhead, closer now. Lightning flashed against the high windows, illuminating the hall in stark relief for a split second. The portraits, the staircase, the two of them standing together against forces they barely understood. The front door opened again. Not dramatically this time, but with controlled urgency. Clara's heart lurched, not with dread, but with something sharper when she saw Edmund standing just inside, rain darkening his coat, droplets clinging to his hair. He had clearly not taken time to dry himself fully, having ridden hard back from town. His gaze swept the hall, reading it in a single glance. The tension in Sir Thomas's posture, the trace of anger still burning in Clara's eyes, the echoes of Thorn's presence hanging in the air like smoke after a fire. "He was here," Edmund said. "It was not a question." "Yes," Clara answered. "You missed him by minutes." His jaw clenched, but his first look was to her. "Did he threaten you?" "Not with anything as crude as that," Clara replied. "He prefers silk over steel, but the blade is there." Edmund stepped closer, stopping at a respectful distance, his attention narrowing to her in a way that made the rest of the hall fade. Rain still beaded on his shoulders. One droplet slid from his hairline down toward his temple. Clara found her gaze tracking it, inexplicably fixated on that small human detail, on the fact that he had ridden fast enough for storm and duty to collide on his skin. "Are you unharmed?" he asked, voice low. The words themselves were simple. The emotion beneath them was not. "I am not made of glass, Your Grace," she said, though the tightness in her chest eased at the question. "But I am tired of men assuming they can measure my worth in coin and consequence." His eyes softened, steel cooling into something more like silver. "They are wrong," he said. No grand speech. Just that. Her father cleared his throat gently. "If you gentlemen will excuse me, I believe I left a decanter uncorked in my study that demands my immediate attention." It was a clumsy excuse, but a kind one. He squeezed Clara's shoulder as he passed, a quiet signal of trust. Then he left them in the hall, the storm their only witness. For a moment, neither spoke. They stood in the center of the polished floor, the portraits of Whitmore ancestors watching from the walls. Edmund's damp coat darkened the air around him with the scent of rain and horse and cold air, wrapping the moment in a freshness that contrasted sharply with Thorn's lingering shadow. "You came back early," Clara said at last. He nodded once. Mallory was not where he said he would be. He sent a representative instead, a man who talks in circles and avoids names. "When I realized Thorn would see that as opportunity, I left the moment I could. You thought I would be reckless," she said, though there was no real accusation in it. "I thought," he answered, "that Thorn would underestimate how little you need him, but I did not intend to leave you to face that alone." A strange warmth spread through her chest, not the wild, uncontrolled heat of humiliation or anger, but something steadier, like a hearth built in a house she had never expected to share. "I was not alone," she said. "My father stood with me and—" She hesitated, then lifted her chin a fraction higher. "Your warning stood with me as well." His gaze held hers, and something unspoken passed between them, as tangible as the thunder vibrating through the floorboards. "I will do more than send warnings," he said quietly. "Next time, I will be here when they test your defenses." "Next time?" she echoed. "There will be one," he said, no illusions softening the certainty. Men like Mallory and Thorn do not retreat at the first resistance. They circle. They probe for weak places. They will come again, with better masks, softer words. "And you?" she asked. "Will you stand at every door?" "If that is what it takes," he replied. It was not a vow spoken in poetic language. It was an oath built from grit and bone, spoken by a man who understood what storms could do to houses that looked sturdy, but were not. Clara watched him, seeing not the Duke on the ballroom dais, but the man who had ridden through rain to arrive breathless at her door, only to find he was moments too late, and angered more by his lateness than by the inconvenience. "You cannot fight all my battles," she said softly. His lips curved, a faint, unexpected smile that transformed his face in a way that startled her. "I am not so arrogant as to try," he answered. "I have seen you fight, Lady Clara. I merely intend to ensure the field is not stacked entirely against you." Thunder rolled again, less violent now, as if the storm were slowly spending its fury. "Then we continue, as we agreed," she said, "as partners." His eyes warmed at the word, though he only inclined his head. "As partners," he echoed. For a moment longer they stood there, wrapped in the echo of the word. The hall felt different than it had that morning, less like a place where verdicts were pronounced from on high, more like the entrance to a story still being written by hands that refused to be guided entirely by anyone else. Lightning flashed beyond the high windows, briefly outlining their silhouettes on the polished floor. Two figures standing side by side, not touching, yet undeniably aligned. The storm was far from over, but neither of them was either. 3 days of rain left Ashbourne wrapped in a damp, restless hush. Roads turned to mud, carriages moved slowly, and even the birds seemed reluctant to waste their songs on grey skies. At Whitmore House, the storm's departure revealed a different kind of tension, one that had nothing to do with weather and everything to do with the invisible net tightening around the estate. Letters arrived. Some bore polite condolences disguised as curiosity. Others carried offers so generous they were insulting, as if vultures believed Whitmore land already half-picked clean. Clara answered none of them. Instead, she spent her days in her father's study, poring over ledgers, teaching herself the language of numbers and obligations in the dim ink-scented light. On the fourth evening, just after the lamps were lit and the first real stars in days managed to pierce the cloud cover, a knock sounded at the back entrance. Not the grand front door. The side one servants used when they did not wish to disturb the household. Clara happened to be in the corridor outside the kitchen, having gone in search of tea after hours of figures. She paused, one hand on the wall for balance, listening as the butler moved to answer the unexpected visitor. The door opened. Cool air slipped in, along with the faint scent of horse and night. "Your Grace," came the butler's startled voice. "We were not expecting—" "I know," Edmund said. His tone was quiet, controlled, but there was a thread of urgency woven through it. "My visit is informal. I would prefer not to disturb Sir Thomas if he is at rest. "He is in the study, Your Grace," the butler replied. "But Lady Clara is just along the corridor." Clara stepped forward then, revealing herself rather than lurk like some eavesdropper in her own house. Edmund turned at the movement, and in the soft light of the back hall he looked different. Less like a duke descending from a dais, more like a man who had ridden hard and chosen the unadorned door because time mattered more than ceremony. His coat bore traces of the road, his cravat slightly loosened, hair not arranged with the usual perfect care. The sight sent an odd warmth through her chest, as if some carefully drawn line between them had blurred just enough to let something human through. "Your Grace," she said, "you honor us with your unconventional entrance." A ghost of a smile flickered across his mouth. "The main drive is being watched," he replied. "I preferred not to alert anyone who might be loitering where they should not." Her brows drew together. "Watched? By whom?" "Men who do not belong to your household," he said. "Likely Mallory's, or Thorne's. The two are increasingly difficult to separate." A chill slipped beneath her skin that had nothing to do with the night air. "And you walked into that willingly?" He shook his head. "I rode past it, then circled back through the lower road." His gaze swept over her, noting the ink on her wrist, where she had brushed a careless hand against a ledger. "You have been working?" "You taught me there was a board," she replied. It seemed wise to learn the pieces. His eyes warmed briefly, pride and concern tangled together. "May I speak with you?" he asked. "And with your father, if he is able?" "Of course." Clara nodded to the butler, who stepped politely aside. "We will use the study." As they walked down the narrow corridor, side by side, the intimacy of the space made everything sharper. The sound of their footsteps, the shift of air when his sleeve moved near hers, the subtle awareness that they were alone in a part of the house rarely graced by dukes. Yet Edmund did not brush against her, did not take advantage of the closeness to crowd her. He kept to his line, respecting both propriety and the fragile trust they had built. In the study, Sir Thomas looked up from the desk, spectacles perched low on his nose. Surprise flared in his eyes at Edmund's appearance, followed by something more cautious, hope tempered by the knowledge that every visit brought both help and risk. "Your Grace," he said, rising, "you come at an odd hour." "The hour is precisely why I chose it," Edmund replied. "May I?" He gestured to a chair. "Please." Sir Thomas resumed his own seat, while Clara took the one she had begun to think of as hers, slightly to the side, where she could see both men and the papers on the desk. Edmund removed his gloves, placing them neatly on a nearby table. It was a small act, yet somehow it felt like the beginning of something. A man preparing to work, not simply to pronounce judgments. "I met with a man in town," he began. "One of Mallory's intermediaries. He confirmed what we suspected. Your debts, Sir Thomas, have been bundled with those of several other gentlemen into a single package, for lack of a better word. Mallory intends to leverage them as one unit." Clara frowned. "What does that mean in practical terms?" "It means," Edmund said, "that he does not particularly care whether it is your land he seizes or another man's, so long as he can make an example of someone. The rest will fall in line out of fear." "An execution to prove a point," Clara murmured. "Precisely." Edmund's gaze met hers, approving the cold clarity of her analogy. "Mallory thrives on panic. If he can convince enough people that he can destroy one house with a gesture, they will accept any terms to avoid being the next." Sir Thomas's hand tightened around the arm of his chair. "And he has chosen Whitmore as his test case." "He is testing several walls at once," Edmund said. "But Whitmore is convenient. A house of good name but limited resources. A daughter who has already been publicly cast aside by a duke." The bluntness stung, though Clara knew he did not wield it to hurt her. He was stating the reality Mallory saw, not his own view. "So we appear weak," she said, "even if we are not." "Yes." Edmund leaned forward, forearms resting on his thighs, hands loosely clasped. The posture pulled him out of the realm of distant nobility and into something more immediate, more engaged. "Which is why we must demonstrate, clearly and visibly, that you are not alone." "Your previous suggestion," Clara said. "Let the world see a connection that certain men may misread. More than see it, he replied. They must believe it enough to adjust their calculations. Sir Thomas frowned. What are you proposing exactly? Edmund hesitated for a heartbeat, as if wary of how the next words would land. Then he looked directly at Clara, not avoiding, not softening. I'm hosting a small gathering at Harrington Hall 3 nights from now, he said. Officially, it is to celebrate the end of the rains and the beginning of the true spring season. Unofficially, it will be a stage. Clara's pulse quickened. A stage for what? For us, he answered. For Harrington and Whitmore to be seen together, not in a ballroom where I stand above and you below, but in rooms where alliances are made over quieter conversations. The same men who circle you will be there, Clara said slowly. Yes, Edmund replied. Mallory will send someone to watch. Thorne will attend in person if he thinks there is gossip to harvest. Others, earls, baronets, men who owe Mallory or fear him, will come to see if Harrington intends to remain aloof, or if he is choosing sides. And by inviting us, Sir Thomas said, you will be seen to choose. I already have, Edmund said simply. He turned to Clara. The question is whether you are willing to be seen at my side again, this time by design, not mistake. Her mind raced through possibilities, the whispers, the glances, the way people would measure every inch between them, every shared look, every word. She remembered the weight of 100 eyes in the Rose Hill ballroom, the humiliation that had pressed against her skin like heat. But this would be different. This time she would not stand alone, waiting for his pronouncement. This time they would walk into the room, already knowing where they stood with each other. What would you have me do? She asked. Nothing you are not already well suited for, he said. Speak to the right people. Laugh at the right moments. Allow them to see that whatever they believe happened in that ballroom, Whitmore has not been cast into exile. That Harrington is engaged. He chose the last word deliberately, watching her reaction. Engaged, she repeated. A dangerous verb. A precise one, he countered. It implies involvement, not promise. Her lips twitched despite everything. You do love your distinctions. They keep men alive, he replied, and sometimes keep women from being cornered. Sir Thomas looked from one to the other, seeing more between them than had been visible weeks ago. If this gathering can buy us time, he said quietly, if it can make Mallory hesitate before he chooses his example, then I am inclined to accept. His gaze settled on Clara. But I will not force you to put yourself again in the path of their scrutiny. You have already borne the brunt of too many men's games. Clara drew in a breath, feeling the weight of 2 sets of eyes on her, one anxious, one controlled but intent. In her mind, she saw the hall at Harrington, the glitter, the pressure, the undercurrent of judgment. She also saw her father's lined face bent over ledgers, the anonymous letters, the way fear had begun to creep into the staff's movements. If standing beside Edmund in a room full of predators could buy even a sliver of safety for those who depended on her, could she refuse? I will go, she said. The decision settled over her with surprising steadiness. But I will not be a silent ornament, smiling at your elbow. Edmund's mouth curved, not quite a smile, but something close. I would be disappointed if you tried. Their eyes held, something unspoken threading between them. Not romance, not yet, but something like mutual recognition of the other's willingness to stand where it was hardest. A gust of wind rattled the study window lightly, as if the last remnants of the storm wanted to remind them it had not fully passed. There is one more matter, Edmund said, drawing a folded paper from his coat, a practical one. He handed it to Sir Thomas, who unfolded it with trembling fingers. Clara leaned slightly forward, reading over her father's shoulder. Her gaze caught on the numbers first, then the signatures. You have purchased them, Sir Thomas breathed. My notes. From Mallory. As many as he would release for now, Edmund said. He dislikes losing control of his toys, but he likes money more. This weakens his hold. It does not remove it entirely. Clara's throat tightened. At what cost? She asked softly. Edmund looked at her, and she saw the truth in his eyes before he spoke. A cost I can afford, he said. One that I am willing to pay. You did not ask us, she said. No, he agreed, Because if I had, your father would have refused from pride, and you would have refused from principle. Neither of those things will protect the tenants who live on this land when Mallory decides to make his move." Her heart pulled in two directions at once, toward gratitude, toward indignation at being maneuvered, even for good reasons. "You play a dangerous game with our autonomy, Your Grace." "Yes," he said quietly, "but I do it openly, and I accept the anger it earns me." Silence stretched between them, thick with everything they could have said and did not. Then Sir Thomas folded the paper carefully, as if it were fragile despite its power. "You have bought us time," he said. "Whatever else I may feel about owing such a debt, I cannot deny that." "You owe me no more than you already did by existing," Edmund replied. The words were strange enough that both Whitmores blinked. He clarified, "I do not do this out of charity. I do it because a world where men like Mallory win is not one I care to live in, and because I find that I would prefer Whitmore House be standing in that world, if it must exist at all." His eyes flicked to Clara on the last part, and something in her chest squeezed. "You speak of houses as if they were people," she said. "Some are," he answered. "This one, for example." Her father pretended not to hear the layered meaning in that, rising with a stiff motion. "You will stay for supper, Your Grace." "I cannot," Edmund said, standing as well, regret flickering briefly on his face. "If I am missed for too long, questions will arise. And I have already given the watchers outside more to speculate about than I'd like." Clara rose too, feeling the familiar mix of reluctance and relief that always accompanied his departures. "Then at least allow the butler to see you out the back." He shook his head. "No, I will leave by the front this time," she frowned. "But you said—" "I said the drive was being watched," he replied. "Let them see. Let them wonder why Harrington chose to visit Whitmore after dark, and why he stayed long enough for every candle in this house to know his shadow." Realization dawned slowly. "You mean to make your presence here part of the display?" "Exactly," he said. "The gathering in 3 nights will not come as a surprise if people have spent the last days whispering about how frequently our paths cross." "You are turning gossip into armor," she murmured. "That is all gossip ever has been," he replied. He put his gloves back on with precise movements, each tug a small ritual of returning to the world outside. Then he inclined his head to Sir Thomas and looked once more at Clara. 3 nights, he said. Harrington Hall. You will receive a formal invitation tomorrow like everyone else, but I wanted you to hear it from me first. We will be there, she said. His gaze lingered for a fraction of a second longer, something unguarded flickering through it. Pride, worry, a restraint that seemed to cost him effort. Then he turned and walked to the door. She followed him into the hall, stopping at the edge of the study's warm light as he moved toward the front entrance. The butler met him there, holding his coat. Edmund shrugged into it, the dark fabric falling around him like night itself. He did not look back as the door opened. Duchess did not look back, she supposed, but as he stepped out into the cool air, she watched the set of his shoulders, the way he paused for half a heartbeat on the threshold, as if feeling the weight of the house he was leaving behind. Then he was gone, the door closing with a quiet, determined click. Clara stood there for a long moment, listening to the diminishing sound of hooves and wheels. The house felt different in his wake, at once more exposed and more defended, as if his presence had drawn invisible lines around it that no one else could see. She touched the doorframe lightly, fingers resting on the smooth wood, and allowed herself one thought she would never have voiced aloud. If this was how alliances in the dark were forged, she did not know whether to be afraid or grateful. Perhaps both. Upstairs, the candle in her room flickered, bending to a draught she had not noticed. Outside, in the deepening night, men Mallory had stationed along the road would mark the Duke's passage and adjust their plans accordingly. Inside, at a small desk littered with numbers and names, Clara would soon sit again, learning how to calculate not just sums, but risks. And somewhere between the two, in the space where duty and desire collided, a bond was forming that no contract could fully define. Harrington Hall had been built to impress, not to welcome. On the evening of the gathering, its long facade blazed with light, every window a bright watching eye. Carriages lined the sweeping drive in a slow, elegant procession, wheels crunching over gravel as the finest families of 3 counties surrendered their invitations at the door. Inside, servants moved with rehearsed precision. Candles were trimmed to perfect height, and the great crystal chandelier in the main hall rained light down on polished marble like captured starlight. In the Whitmore carriage, just beyond the final curve of the drive, Clara smoothed her gloved hands over her skirts for the 3rd time, then forced herself to stop. Fidgeting would not change anything. It would only give her nerves a physical outlet they did not deserve. Her gown was a deep green tonight, a deliberate choice. Softer than Harrington blue, richer than the pale pastels favored by debutantes. It caught the light without screaming for it, the high waistline and modest neckline conforming to fashion while refusing to beg. Her hair had been swept up with understated care, a few tendrils left loose at her temples, not as an invitation, but as an assertion that perfection was not her goal. "So you look like your mother on the night she refused a viscount in front of half of London," Sir Thomas said from the seat across, watching her with a mixture of pride and apology. "She had better reasons than I do," Clara replied, though the comment eased some of the tightness in her chest. "I am not here to refuse anyone, only to be seen." Her father's jaw clenched. "If there were any other way—" "There isn't," she said gently. "We both know it. Tonight is not about us enjoying ourselves. It is about reminding certain men that we are not theirs to move as they please." The carriage rolled forward, joining the line inching toward Harrington's steps. Through the window, Clara could see figures already ascending. Ladies in shimmering gowns, lords in impeccable coats, masks of affability worn over calculations. Somewhere among them, Mallory's eyes would be taking stock, even if his body never crossed the threshold. And Edmund would be there. The thought sent a quick, undeniable current through her. She had not seen him since his late visit to Whitmore House, though his presence had lingered in every decision she'd made since. Now they would step into a room together again, under the scrutiny of people eager to dissect every glance. "Remember," she murmured to herself as the carriage finally drew up before the entrance, "this is a move on the board, nothing more." The door opened. Cool night air rushed in, carrying with it the distant hum of conversation and the nearer murmur of footmen calling names. Sir Thomas descended first, then turned to offer his hand. Clara took it and stepped down, the gravel firm beneath her slippers, the long flight of Harrington stairs rising before her like a test carved in stone. They climbed. At the top, a steward announced them in a clear, practiced voice that carried easily into the reception hall. Sir Thomas Whitmore and Lady Clara Whitmore. For a heartbeat, the swell of conversation dipped like a wave drawing back from shore. Clara felt the subtle shift, the way glances slid their way, some curious, some sharp, some tinged with that peculiar mix of fascination and pity that had followed her since Rosehill. She kept her chin steady, shoulders relaxed, every line of her body a quiet refusal to acknowledge the weight of their judgment. She saw Edmund before he moved. He stood near the center of the hall, speaking to an earl whose name she only vaguely recalled. His dark coat immaculate, his cravat precise, his posture that of a man entirely at ease in a room wired to his advantage. Yet when their names were called, his attention broke from his companion with a clean, unhesitating shift. For a moment he simply looked at her, not as a duke surveys a guest, but as a man takes stock of an ally stepping onto a dangerous field. Then he began to cross the room. Conversations thinned along his path, people parting with the unconscious deference power always commanded. Clara's heartbeat quickened, but she anchored herself in the small, grounding details, the feel of silk against her wrists, the faint scent of beeswax and flowers in the air, her father's reassuring presence at her side. Edmund stopped before them and bowed, not the shallow, perfunctory nod he might offer a lesser baronet, but a full inclination of respect. When he straightened, his gaze met hers first. "Sir Thomas, Lady Clara," he said, "thank you for accepting my invitation." "Your Grace," her father replied, returning the bow. "Your hall has never looked finer." "It does its best," Edmund said, but there was no pride in the words, only faint distraction. His focus remained fixed on Clara, scanning her face with a quick, almost imperceptible check, as if confirming she was truly as composed as she appeared. "Lady Clara," he added, voice softening by a fraction, "the color suits you." The compliment, simple as it was, rang different from the practiced flattery drifting through the hall. It was not about beauty, not really. It was about presence. "Green happens to be strategic," she replied lightly. "It is harder to stain than white." A spark of amusement touched his eyes, gone as quickly as it came. "Then it is appropriate for tonight," he said. A murmur rose nearby as a new set of guests were announced. From the corner of her eye, Clara saw Lord Thorne enter, his smile already in place, his gaze sweeping the room with the lazy precision of a hunting cat feigning boredom. Their eyes met. For the briefest second, surprise flared in his features, real unmasked, at the sight of Clara standing beside Edmund in the heart of Harrington's domain. Then the mask slid back into place, smoother than ever. "Lord Thorne," Edmund said under his breath, just loud enough for Clara to hear, "right on cue." "You did invite him," she murmured. "I did," he agreed. "Every stage needs its villain." She did not argue the choice, though a cold knot formed in her stomach. "And what role would you have me play, Your Grace?" He looked at her fully then, the noise of the room drifting into a blur behind the sharp focus of his gaze. "Your own," he said. "You do it better than anyone else could imitate." It was, in its way, the most flattering thing he could have said. Before she could frame a reply, the orchestra in the adjoining ballroom struck up a waltz, the first notes spilling into the hall like an invitation. Edmund straightened, the Duke in him stepping forward. "Lady Clara," he said in a voice pitched just enough to carry to the nearest ears, "may I have this dance?" The question hung in the air like a tossed coin. She knew what accepting meant, knew what refusing would mean even more. After a brief heartbeat, she inclined her head. "You may, Your Grace." He offered his arm. She placed her hand lightly on the fine wool of his sleeve, feeling the solid muscle beneath, the subtle shift as he adjusted his pace to match hers. They moved toward the ballroom together, aware of how many eyes had turned to follow. The floor had already begun to fill with couples by the time they stepped through the doorway, but a lane seemed to open before them, as if the room itself recognized the significance of their entrance. The chandelier overhead scattered light across Edmund's dark hair, across the determined set of Clara's mouth, across the almost imperceptible tension in the line of his shoulders. At the edge of the dance floor, they turned to face one another. For a moment, the world narrowed to the space between their hands. He took her right hand in his left, his grip firm yet careful, as though acutely aware of the symbolic weight of the contact. His other hand came to rest, properly, at the back of her waist, through layers of fabric precisely where etiquette allowed, nowhere else. And yet the sensation of that touch traveled much deeper than the few inches his gloved palm actually claimed. Clara placed her free hand lightly on his shoulder, feeling the warmth of him even through the structured cloth. His pulse beat a steady rhythm beneath her fingers, strong and controlled, no more hurried than the music required. "Breathe," he murmured, so quietly she almost missed it. "I am," she replied. "Then breathe for yourself," he said, "not for them." The waltz began in earnest. They moved. Edmund was an excellent dancer, not just technically, but instinctively. He guided without forcing, adjusted without drawing attention, turning each step into a conversation her body could follow, even when her mind wanted to run 3 moves ahead. He did not use the dance as an excuse to draw her closer than was proper, yet somehow the space between them felt charged. Every slight shift of weight, every matched turn, a reminder that this was not simply performance. It was practice, for trust, for shared balance. Around them, other couples twirled, skirts sweeping, coats flaring, laughter and murmurs rising in layered sound. Clara caught flashes of familiar faces as they passed, women who had whispered about her, men who had dismissed her, now watching with thinly veiled interest as Harrington and Whitmore circled the floor in perfect time. Thorne stood at the edge of the crowd, one shoulder against a pillar, arms loosely folded. His expression was lazy, but his eyes were sharp, following every turn. "Do not look at him," Edmund said, sensing the subtle change in her focus. "I wasn't," she replied. "You were about to," he countered. "And if I had been." "Then he would have smiled," Edmund said, "and believed he still had a hold on you." She adjusted her gaze, deliberately lifting it to meet his instead. "Whom should I look at then?" He held her gaze without flinching. "Me," he said simply. "If you must look at anyone, it should not have affected her as it did." It was strategy, nothing more. A way to deny Thorn the satisfaction of seeing any flicker of attention directed his way. And yet the idea of using Edmund as a shield, of allowing herself to anchor in his eyes instead of in her own restless thoughts, brought an unexpected steadiness. So she did. She watched the small details she rarely allowed herself to examine. The slight line between his brows that appeared whenever he concentrated, the way his eyes softened by a shade when she did not drop her gaze, the faintest curve of his mouth when her footwork matched his perfectly through a complicated turn. "You trust me," he said quietly, more observation than question, as the waltz carried them into a smooth sweep past the musicians. "In some matters," she replied, unwilling to give him more ground than necessary. "In this," he clarified, indicating the space around them, the swirl of bodies, the eyes, the potential for humiliation if either of them faltered. "In this," she conceded. "Yes." His fingers tightened fractionally on her hand, a brief pulse of pressure that felt less like possession and more like acknowledgement. "Good," he said. "Then allow me to lead where the floor is slick." Her brow arched. "Do you think I will slip?" "I know the tricks men like Thorn use," he answered. "They do not always throw stones. Sometimes they spill oil and wait for someone to fall of their own accord." "Poetic," she murmured. "Practical," he corrected. They moved through another turn, skirts flaring, his frame a steady axis around which she revolved. For a moment, Clara allowed herself to forget who might be watching, to simply feel the strange rightness of their bodies moving in sync, their breaths aligning every time they drew near. At the far side of the room, near the tall windows, she caught a glimpse of a man she did not recognize, a little too well dressed to be a servant, a little too uncomfortable to be truly at home among the guests. His eyes swept the dance floor, not lingering on any one couple, but tallying connections. "Mallory's man?" she asked quietly as they passed that section of the room again. Edmund followed her quick glance without breaking their rhythm. "Most likely," he said. "He will carry back every detail he can. Who spoke to whom, who avoided whom, who danced." "Then perhaps we should give him something to report," she said. "We already have," Edmund replied. "Harrington and Whitmore together, in the center of the floor. That alone will unsettle his master more than any overheard conversation." The music swelled, approaching its close. Dancers tightened their circles, partners drawing into a final flourish. Edmund guided them into the last turn, then came to a smooth stop, releasing her waist as the final note rang out. For one suspended breath, they simply stood there, hands still joined, the echo of the waltz humming in their bodies. Then applause rose, polite and practiced. Edmund bowed, Clara curtsied. As they straightened, he did not immediately step back into the crowd. Instead, he held her gaze for another heartbeat longer. "Well done," he said softly. "You did not slip." "Nor did you," she replied. "Which is fortunate. I have been told the fall of a duke is quite a spectacle." A faint glint of humor warmed his eyes. "Let us hope no one sees that tonight." As they left the floor, Clara became acutely aware of the way people shifted to let them pass. Some offered smiles, some nods, some strained attempts at casual greetings. A few ladies dipped shallow curtsies as if by reflex, as though standing in proximity to Harrington required deference, even when he did not demand it. Lord Thorn approached with a glass in hand, his expression all charm. "Your Grace," he said. "Lady Clara. A remarkable display. I had not expected to see such harmony between you after recent events." "Harmony is often misunderstood by those who think only in terms of advantage," Edmund said mildly. "Then allow me to adjust my understanding," Thorn replied. His gaze slid to Clara, assessing. "Lady Clara, you astonish the room. Resilience becomes you." "Resilience is easier to cultivate when one stops expecting fairness," she said. A brief, strained silence followed. Thorn's eyes hardened for a fraction of a second before he laughed, the sound a bit too smooth. "Spoken like someone who has spent too much time with Harrington," he said. "One might think you were beginning to share his perspective. One might think many things after a single dance," she answered. "Most of them wrong." Edmund's hand remained at the small of her back, proper, light, but undeniably present. The gesture was subtle, yet in a room trained to read such signals it spoke clearly. She was not standing alone. Thorne's gaze flicked to that hand, then back to their faces. "I see," he said softly. "Well, the night is young. I look forward to seeing how the rest of it unfolds." He moved away, melting into a cluster of guests with practiced ease. Clara let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Edmund's hand left her back, the absence of warmth almost startling. "You handled him well," he said. "Better than some men twice your age have managed." "I'm tired of being a target," she replied. "If I must be part of their games, I would at least like to choose when and how I move." His eyes softened. "You are not a piece on their board," he said. "Not anymore." "Because I am on yours?" she asked. "Because you are learning how to turn the board over," he countered. Before she could answer, a lady in a pale gown approached, offering Edmund a bright, brittle smile and a remark about the music. He answered politely, stepping aside just enough to engage without inviting more. Clara, recognizing the moment's shift from strategy to social obligation, inclined her head. "I will find my father," she said. "He is likely being cornered by someone eager to tell him how much they admire his courage." "I will join you shortly," Edmund replied. Their eyes met one last time, a silent exchange of acknowledgement passing between them, before the room reclaimed them both. As Clara moved through the crowd, snippets of conversation drifted past. "Never thought Whitmore would show her face again. Harrington must be mad risking his name after that spectacle, or very sure of something the rest of us don't know." At the edge of her awareness, she sensed Mallory's man watching, cataloguing every word. Let him, she thought. Let them all. Tonight, she and Edmund had stepped into the center of their scrutiny and not shattered. Whatever storm still waited outside the gilded walls of Harrington Hall, this was one small proof to themselves and to each other that they could stand upright in the wind. And somewhere in that standing, in the steady weight of his hand at her back, in the way his eyes had sought hers when the floor grew treacherous, a new fragile kind of trust had begun to grow, one neither of them had intended, but both had quietly chosen. The wolves would not give up, but neither would they. The days after Harrington Hall's gathering unfolded like a tightly wound spring, outwardly calm, inwardly coiled with mounting pressure. Letters ceased arriving at Whitmore House, replaced by an unnatural silence that felt more ominous than any threat. Servants whispered of unfamiliar riders spotted on distant hills, of carriages lingering too long at crossroads. Sir Thomas spent longer hours with solicitors, his face growing greyer, while Clara walked the estate's boundaries each morning, as if her presence alone could reinforce invisible walls. Edmund's visits continued, never announced, always purposeful. He arrived at dawn or dusk, conferring with Sir Thomas over maps and ledgers, then seeking Clara for brief, charged conversations in the sunlit conservatory or shadowed library. Their exchanges were practical. Updates on Mallory's movements, strategies for the next creditor meeting, quiet assessments of Thorne's latest maneuvers. Yet beneath the strategy hummed something deeper, an unspoken rhythm developing between them, built from shared glances that lingered a fraction too long, from the way their sentences sometimes overlapped in perfect anticipation. On the seventh morning, Edmund arrived alone, his horse lathered from a hard ride. Rain had returned overnight, turning paths to slick mud, but he dismissed the groom with a nod and strode directly to the conservatory where Clara stood among ferns and orchids, a letter crushed in her fist. She did not turn at his entrance, but her shoulders tensed. A silent signal she had heard his boots on the stone floor. "Thorne has gone too far this time," she said without preamble, voice tight with controlled fury. Edmund crossed the room in 3 strides, stopping at a respectful distance behind her. The glass walls amplified every sound, the patter of rain, the rustle of leaves as she finally pivoted to face him, emerald eyes blazing. In her hand dangled a single sheet of Harrington stationery. Not hers, stolen or intercepted. "He sent this to my father," she said, thrusting it toward him. "An invitation to a private card party at his estate tomorrow night. To discuss mutual interests in Whitmore's future, with a postscript suggesting I accompany him as entertainment." Edmund took the paper, his jaw tightening as he scanned the words. The audacity burned, Thorn twisting their public dance into private invitation, positioning himself as Clara's rescuer, while tightening the noose around her family. "He mistakes patience for weakness," he said, voice low and edged with steel. "He mistakes me for prey," Clara corrected. Rain streaked the glass panes behind her, framing her in silver light, but her gaze held his without flinching. "I will go, with my father, and end this farce directly." "No." The refusal came sharp, instinctive. Edmund stepped closer, the space between them shrinking to inches, charged with the urgency of the moment. He did not touch her, but his presence filled the conservatory like the storm outside, solid, unyielding. Thorn does not invite for conversation. He stages traps. "Then we dismantle it," she countered, chin lifting defiantly. Their breaths mingled in the humid air, proximity amplifying every micro-shift, the faint tremor in her clenched fist, the subtle flare of his nostrils as anger warred with restraint. Edmund's eyes darkened not with desire, but with the raw protectiveness surging through him. He saw it then, the toll this siege had taken, shadows beneath her eyes, the tightness around her mouth that no amount of resolve could fully hide. "You are not a soldier to charge his gates," he said softly, voice dropping to that gravel timbre that seemed reserved only for her. "Let me handle Thorn." Clara's laugh came brittle, edged with exhaustion. "As you handled the ballroom, by deciding my worth for an audience?" The words struck like a slap, but pain flickered immediately in her expression, regret for the cruelty born of fear. Edmund absorbed it without flinching, steel-grey eyes locking onto hers with unflagging intensity. "That was strategy," he replied evenly. "This is personal. Thorn wants you isolated, vulnerable. He will use your presence to bait reactions, from your father, from onlookers, from me. And if I refuse to play isolated?" she challenged, stepping infinitesimally closer, the hem of her gown brushing his boot. The air thickened, heavy with unsaid truths, rain drumming a frantic rhythm on the glass dome overhead. His hand lifted, not to touch her but to hover near her wrist, as if anchoring the space without claiming it. "Then he wins the first fracture," he murmured. "You stand stronger beside allies than alone against enemies." Their gazes collided, emerald fire meeting tempered steel, the conservatory fading until only this charged pocket remained. Clara felt the pull toward him, not physical but emotional, a magnetic draw born of shared battles, of nights spent mapping dangers neither had chosen. His proximity stirred something deep, safety tangled with challenge, trust warring with independence. "You cannot shield me from every shadow," she whispered, voice cracking on the edge of vulnerability. "I do not wish to shield you," he answered, thumb brushing air millimeters from her glove, the almost touch electric in its restraint. "I wish to stand with you when they fall." Silence stretched, broken only by rain. Clara's breath hitched, chest rising sharply as emotion crested. Gratitude, frustration, the perilous bloom of something neither named. Edmund's jaw clenched, restraint costing visible effort, eyes tracing the fierce determination reshaping her features. A distant door slammed, servants returning from market. The spell fractured. Edmund lowered his hand first, stepping back with controlled precision. "Burn the invitation," he said, tone resuming command. "I will handle Thorn tonight, privately." Clara nodded, pulse still racing from the intensity. "And if he refuses reason?" "He will not refuse consequence," Edmund replied, gaze lingering one last beat, promise, warning, connection. Then he turned for the door, coat swirling, leaving her amid orchids and the echo of almosts. That evening, Harrington Hall's private study glowed with firelight, brandy decanters untouched on mahogany sideboards. Edmund paced before the hearth, shadows leaping across ancestral portraits when Thorn was announced. The Viscount entered with predatory ease, smile curving like a blade. "Your Grace." An unexpected summons. Edmund ceased pacing, turning with glacial calm. "Sit." Thorn complied, lounging with deliberate insolence. "To what do I owe this intimacy?" "Your letter to Sir Thomas," Edmund said flatly, tossing the intercepted copy onto the table between them. Withdraw it. Cease contact with Whitmore. Thorne's brows arched theatrically. Protective, are we? After your very public disavowal? Precisely because of it, Edmund replied, leaning forward, forearms braced on the table. Firelight carved hollows beneath his eyes, sharpening the predatory glint. You mistake theatre for truth, harm Whitmore, and you challenge Harrington directly. Thorne's smile faltered, calculation flickering. And if I decline? Mallory holds the notes. He decides. Mallory holds paper, Edmund interrupted, voice lethal silk. I hold influence. Every man at your card party owes me favors. Refuse, and your invitations become your noose. Tension crackled. Thorne's fingers drummed once, twice. You're bluffing. Edmund's gaze turned arctic. Test me. Silence stretched, taut as bowstring. Thorne exhaled sharply, mask cracking. Very well, the invitation withdraws itself. Edmund straightened. And future interests in Whitmore? Purely academic. Thorne rose, composure fraying. But understand this, Harrington, alliances shift. The lady may yet seek better prospects. Edmund's smile chilled the room. She already has. Thorne departed, door clicking shut like a cocked pistol. Dawn broke clear over Whitmore House. Clara found Edmund in the stables, currying his stallion with methodical strokes, sleeves rolled to elbows, Duke reduced to groom, tension evident in rigid shoulders. He came to you, she said, not question. Edmund nodded without turning. Invitation rescinded. Mallory's man will hear of it by noon. Relief washed her, chased by deeper currents. You did not have to. Yes, he interrupted softly, finally facing her. Hay motes danced between them, morning light gilding his features. I did. Clara stepped into the shadowed stall, proximity reclaiming its charge. Why? The question hung raw, stripped of pretense. His brush stilled. Eyes met, vulnerability cracking granite facade. Because watching you fracture under their pressure undoes me. The admission trembled in the air, soul deep. Clara's breath caught, emotions surging, recognition of mutual unraveling, the quiet terror of caring too deeply in a world demanding armor. She reached not to touch but to mirror his earlier gesture, hand hovering near his. Then we hold steady together. His gaze dropped to her fingers, then lifted, steel melting into silver warmth. Together. No kiss, no embrace. Only this. Two souls aligned in silent vow, rain-scented air thick with unspoken passion, the stallion's soft snort underscoring fragile peace. Outside, Thorne's carriage rattled away from a distant crossroads, plans rerouted. But deeper fractures waited. Mallory regrouping, societal whispers sharpening into claws. For now, in the stable's hush, Edmund and Clara stood on the precipice of confession, hands inches apart, hearts irrevocably entwined. The final storm brewed. Moonlight silvered the battlements of Harrington Hall, turning ancient stone into something ethereal, almost fragile. Inside the Duke's private library, shadows clung to leather-bound volumes and flickering candle flames that danced like hesitant confessions. Edmund Harrington stood before the tall arched window, one gloved hand braced against the cold sill, his breath fogging the glass in shallow bursts. Outside, Ashbourne's hills rolled dark and silent under a sky pricked with stars, but peace felt like a lie tonight. His reflection stared back, jaw clenched so tightly, a muscle pulsed rhythmically, steel-grey eyes shadowed with something deeper than fatigue. Exhaustion from weeks of maneuvering against Mallory's web? Yes, but more, a fracture widening in his chest, the kind duty could no longer contain. Clara's face haunted every quiet moment, her emerald fire in the conservatory, the defiant lift of her chin during their waltz, the raw vulnerability when she'd whispered of shadows he couldn't fully banish. He pressed his forehead against the chill pain. Fool, he thought. You've built an empire on restraint. One woman unravels it all. Footsteps echoed in the corridor, heavy, urgent. Edmund straightened as the door burst open without knock. Sir Thomas Whitmore stumbled in, coat askew, face ashen beneath lantern light. Behind him, two Harrington footmen supported a limp figure cloaked in night. "Edmund!" Sir Thomas's voice cracked, raw with terror. "Mallory's men. They ambushed our carriage on the North Road. Clara, she's—" The cloak fell away. Clara slumped against the footman, gown torn at the sleeve, chestnut curls dishevelled, a thin trickle of blood tracing her temple. Her eyes fluttered open, glassy, unfocused, then sharpened on him. "Edmund." The whisper carried impossible weight, laced with pain and something fiercer, unyielding trust. Rage ignited in his veins, hot and primal, but his voice emerged controlled, lethal calm. "Get her to the settee, fetch Dr. Hargrove, now." The servants obeyed instantly, laying her gently on velvet cushions. Sir Thomas hovered, wringing hands, murmuring apologies that dissolved into choked sobs. Edmund dropped to one knee beside her, gloved fingers hovering near her cheek. Afraid to touch, afraid not to. Rain scent clung to her hair, mingled with copper tang of blood, the faint lavender of her soap. Her chest rose shallowly, each breath a small victory against encroaching dark. "Clara," he murmured, voice gravel-thick. "Stay with me." Her gaze locked onto his, emerald dimmed but burning. Lips parted, no sound at first, then a faint curve, ghost of her defiant smile. "Told you. Storms come." Her fingers twitched toward his, connection electric despite inches separating them. He captured her hand then, glove shedding to bare skin against hers, warm, trembling, alive. Pulse thundered in his ears, drowning thunder rumbling distant hills. Not her. Not like this. Thoughts fractured, duty screaming retreat, heart roaring forward. "You will not leave me," he commanded softly, thumb tracing her knuckles, committing every ridge to memory. "Hear me, Clara Whitmore. Whatever it takes." She squeezed weakly, eyes glistening, not tears, but fever-bright resolve. "Together," she breathed, echoing their stable vow. The word hung, suspended, pulling invisible threads tighter between souls long entangled. Sir Thomas gasped. "Together? Edmund? What?" Hooves thundered outside, Dr. Hargrove's arrival. Servants swarmed, water, bandages, murmured orders. Edmund rose reluctantly, yielding space but never gaze. As the physician worked, cleaning wound, murmuring assurances, Edmund paced like caged wolf, every fiber screaming to shield her from world that dared wound her. Hours blurred. Hargrove departed with grim promise. Concussion. Rest. She'll mend. Sir Thomas slumped in armchair, exhaustion claiming him. Library fell silent save Clara's even breaths, candle flames guttering low. Edmund pulled chair close, settling beside settee. Moonlight slanted across her face, lashes fanned dark crescents, lips parted softly. He reached, hesitated, then brushed thumb feather light along her jaw, skin velvet warm, stirring ache deep in chest. Mine to protect. Mine to... The thought terrified, exhilarated. Duty had armored him against softer emotions. Clara shattered it daily. Her eyes fluttered open. Edmund. No question. Recognition instant, pulling him into private universe. "You're safe," he whispered, leaning nearer, forehead nearly touching hers. Shared breath mingled, his leather amber scent, her lavender rain, intimacy woven from proximity alone. "Mallory's men won't touch you again." Fury flickered in emerald depths. He wanted leverage. Voice faint, but steel beneath. "Thorn betrayed us. Told Mallory our route." Edmund's free hand clenched, knuckles whitening. "Thorn is finished. Mallory too." Vow carved from granite, but gaze softened on her. "You fought them." Her laugh, weak, breathless, tugged heartstrings. "Promised, no more alone." Fingers intertwined tighter, pulse sinking through palms. Silence deepened, charged, unsaid words trembling on lips. He leaned fraction closer. "Clara." Name caress, laden with weeks' restraint. Eyes traced her face. Faint freckles storm-silvered, lips curve hinting smiles only he witnessed. Chest tightened. Love, unnamed but undeniable, cresting like wave. "I was wrong." In the ballroom, every word. Confusion furrowed brow. Edmund, listen. Forehead touched hers, gentle, reverent, world narrowing to shared breath, heartbeat thunder. You were never lowborn, never unfit. Your voice fractured, throat worked. Everything. Her gasp, soft, startled, eyes widening, shimmering. Hand cupped his jaw, trembling but sure, thumb tracing jaw shadow. Edmund Harrington, she whispered, wonder threading pain. The Ice Duke melts. He captured her palm, pressing kiss to center, chaste, searing soul deep. For you. Only you. Confession broke down. I love you. Have since first defiant glance across Rose Hill floor. Feared it. Fought it. Lost. Tears spilled. Hers, his. Silver trails moonlight kissed. She tugged gently, lips brushing feather light. Innocent promise. Emotional torrent. Time suspended. Warmth shared breaths. Salt-tang tears. Heartbeat duet. No hunger. Pure connection. Souls bared. Defenses crumbled. I love you, she echoed against his mouth. Words vow sealed. Always did. Dawn crept rose gold through windows as they parted, foreheads touching, hands entwined. Library transformed, enemies to lovers forged in fire, passion triumphing honor's chains. Sunrise gilded Ashbourne's great hall, assembled peers murmuring as Edmund descended grand staircase, Clara's hand tucked securely in his elbow, Sir Thomas beaming beside. Whispers hushed, eyes widened. Lords, ladies. Edmund's voice rang clear, commanding silence. Last night Mallory's men attacked Whitmore Carriage. Their error. Gasps rippled. Thorn paled corner shadows. Mallory holds no notes, Edmund continued. I've acquired them all. Thorn, your treachery ends here. Guard stepped forward. Thorn seized, sputtering protests. Betrayal of Whitmore is betrayal of Harrington. Peers nodded. Justice resonated. Edmund turned to Clara, eyes softening whirled away from Duke's steel. Knee bent, slow, deliberate, drawing velvet box. Gasps swelled anew. Lady Clara Whitmore, he said, voice carrying tender thunder. From enemies forged in fire to passion eternal. Be my Duchess. Not duty but desire, my heart's sovereign. Tears glistened her lashes, chin lifted, defiant grace. Yes, Edmund Harrington, with every breath. Cheers erupted, thunderous, heartfelt. Ring slid onto finger, perfect fit, emerald matching eyes, lips met, brief, profound, sealing union before witnesses. Rose Hill Manor's gardens bloomed riotous spring, petals drifting lazy breeze. Clara and Edmund walked gravel paths, hands entwined, world theirs alone. Scandal shattered, she teased, yet here we stand. His thumb traced her knuckles. You shattered me first. Gaze held, love's quiet fire. Worth every storm. She leaned head shoulder, inhaling leather amber sanctuary. Together, she murmured. Together, he echoed, kissing crown. Forever vow. Enemies no more. Duchess dawned. The end. Subscribe for more Regency passion. Comment your location.